Every time I walk up there, I walk in to say hello, and every time I come there, like he just left, and I'm like, are you serious?
thanks everybody for being here. Before we get started working through the agenda, Ms. Waddell is here to speak to us. You can come to the podium here, and if you can just state your name and address, and we will do 3 minutes.
Okay. My name is Carol Waddell, and I work with a nonprofit organization that's here in Alabama called Ross. Ross is like I said, not-for-profit organization, and what we do is we help our peers who are seeking treatment for substance use disorder. We help them to find the resources available for that. We help with people who have had overdoses. We can try to connect with them in the hospitals and institutions and help them to, like I said, obtain treatment for that. We empower and collaborate with them. We try to advocate for them to help them obtain recovery. I'm a person in long-term recovery, and so because I've walked that road before myself, I can help other people do that. I'm an outreach worker here in Morgan County and in Limestone County, so I'm boots on the ground. Ross is, like I said, it's in Alabama. We're in over 33 counties. We're not seeking money from you. We just want to bring out information to anybody who might be interested in that, anybody who might know somebody who needs help. We have a warm line. It's a 24/7 warm line. I have all the information with me if anybody's interested in that. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Ms. Waddell?
33 counties in Alabama, all in Alabama?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes. And we're backed by the Alabama Department of Mental Health.
You said you had some stuff with you.
Yeah, I do.
Can we get some of it?
Absolutely.
A copy?
Leave this up here. This is for
Thank you. Thank you. I'll start.
You might have some questions later. I'll leave my card so you can call me.
Yeah, and I think Stephanie had the card as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Waddell.
Thank you.
All right, we will move through the agenda and get any questions answered. And I know we've got a couple of things to talk about at the end as well. First, here we have approval of minutes, July 12th, 2021, 5 p.m. work session, July 19th, 2021, 9:30 a.m. work session, City Council regular meeting, July 19th, 2021, 10 a.m., July 19th, 2021, 1 p.m. special called work session, and July 20th, 2021, 8:30 a.m. special called work session. Any questions? All right, next we have set a public hearing, resolution number 21-193, authorize abatement of unsafe conditions at 817 Church Street Northwest. The public hearing will be set for September 7th, 2021 at 6 p.m. Mr. Lee.
I'm here for the next one.
Okay, any questions for David on that one?
No.
All right, next is public hearings, resolution number 21-156, authorize abatement of unsafe conditions at 823 Fifth Avenue Southeast. Public hearing set for August 2nd, 2021, 6 p.m.
Thank you. There was a very substantial fire here. The owner of the property had asked for a short extension, and we had granted it. He was never able to do anything towards repair. Unbeknownst to us, he had tried to sell it to someone else. The closing never took place because the closing attorney found out that it was an unsafe building. And so we had talked to the that prospective buyer, they've not done anything. The last we heard, the sale had not closed. It's open and unsecure. We've been told that some homeless people had gone in and they cleaned out a place inside the house and had a tent set up inside. It's a public nuisance. I don't know if any of y'all have been by yet or not. Sure you will, but we'll ask next week that the council authorize the demolition.
Thanks, David. Any questions? Thank you, sir. Next, we have resolution number 21-194, approve request for off-premise beer and wine license for V Hope Incorporated, doing business as V Hope, located at 1010 19th Avenue, Southeast Decatur, Alabama 35601.
Evening, council. This is a request for off-premise beer and wine for V Hope. I believe it's going to be in the paper tomorrow, and everything is checked out thus far.
All right, any questions? Thank you, sir. Next, we have our weed abatements. David, anything?
No changes on
Okay. Any questions? All right. All right, into resolutions. Resolution number 21-203, approve MUB expenditure of $245,900 for Grant Street Regulator Station upgrades.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Ladner, council and mayor. This project here is for the natural gas system. It's going to reinforce some of our industrial customers down in the southeast section. Meow Mix, Bungie, ConAgra, Howsung, all those industries there. Currently they're fed out of our Vine Street Regulator Station, which is near the wastewater plant, so it's a good distance to it. It's a project we've been wanting to do for several years and finally got it engineered and we're ready to do it. This will reinforce those and have a dual feed, if you will, to those industries down there and support them. So the cost for this project is $245,900. We did bid this out and competitive bid. Double D Pipeline was the low responsive bidder. They've done work with us before and satisfy all the work that they've done for us, and we do have confidence in them, and they will complete this project for us. This is in our current 2021 year budget. Our board has approved this project. So with that, we'd like to request the council for approval and entertain any questions you might have about the project.
All right, thanks, Gary. Any questions? I think we're good. Thank you. All right, next is resolution number 21-204, approve transfer to capital for construction of 3 new pavilions at Wilson Morgan.
Thank you, Council President, Council Mayor. This is a house cleaning item that we have worked with Jeff Shelton about and Kyle, and they have done a good job of walking us through it. This, from what I understand, is a coating deal where it just needed to be cleaned up. So anything further than that, I'd have to get them to help because there's a lot of numbers involved and they do that. So.
Okay, you nothing to add?
It's just a capital item. It needs to vote on it. It's capital in nature.
Yeah.
It needs to vote. So that's what this is.
Okay, any questions? Hey, the damage that happened last week, what's that looking like?
They did a good job getting in. Luckily, a lot of the fence was still usable. We were able to come in, prop stuff up, get it usable for the tournament that weekend. It went great. We're doing cost assessment on the rest of it and working with finance on that.
Okay.
That fencing came from the CVB, a large portion of it.
Well, and this is a good opportunity. Thank you for bringing that up that way. The fencing that was there is something we worked with CVB and tourism on at the beginning of this year. So when we redid the ball fields out there, we would have nice new fencing. And of course, the situation, it was not a great situation, but I feel like at the end of the day, we're still going to be able to use most of that. We may have to replace a little bit of it, but it could have been a lot worse.
Thanks, Jason. All right, resolution number 21205, accept CLG grant for Second Avenue resurvey.
Yes, this is a grant that we applied for through the Alabama Historic Commission. This grant will allow us to do some resurveying on Second Avenue. And as we go through these, there's a couple of them that we've already got budgeted in this year's budget. The rest of them, and this is one of them, that we would request that we will ask for the grant match in the 2022 grant match budget.
Okay.
But
Any
this
questions?
is to accept this grant. Caroline's here if you have any questions about the particulars about what we'll be doing.
Okay.
She'll be glad to answer those.
Any questions on that one? All right, next is resolution number 21206, accept CLG window workshop grant.
Yes, this is another one of the grants that we applied for. We do have the money budgeted in this year's budget for that grant to do a workshop. Seems like that with a lot of the COAs that we receive as concerns windows, and this will allow us to bring in a specialist to do a workshop to explain how to rework windows as opposed to trying to get approval to put new windows in.
Okay.
Is that
Any
right?
questions? You got it, Caroline?
Yeah,
Okay.
she'll jump up and smack me in the head if I say something wrong.
All right, next is resolution 21207, accept historic structures report grant.
This is a grant that we will use to do historic structures on the Princess Theater. We've got some issues that we need to address with that building, and this will allow us, the first process in getting a grant to do some renovations at the Princess is having this historic structures report. So we've got to do that before we can go to the next step of getting funds or funding for the actual brick and mortar to do those renovations.
How long's the process, Howard?
Caroline?
Most of these grants, we've got them for about a year. So we will put out a call for a historic architecture and engineering firm to come in and do the work. It'll probably depend a little bit on what their scope of other projects is, but I would expect finished report by late spring, early summer, so a little less than a year. Because these grants need to be closed out sort of by end of summer with the federal government. And
That's the one I was, so the grant would be awarded.
the grant would be awarded the minute y'all sign it.
Yeah.
I send out an RFP requesting people to send in bids. And then we award it as fast as we can, and then they've got to turn it before, I think the federal cut date is late August, early September of next year.
Thank you.
And this will be another one that we will budget in 2022. And if you don't mind, I apologize, but going back to the Second Avenue, that project is about $30,000. The actual grant was $20,000. So that request that's in the resolution gets that, what we feel like it's gonna cost us to do that. So we requested $30,000, they only gave us 20, but we're asking for that additional match if you start trying to do the math. And you look at, well, that's not 40%, that's
Right.
why, because that's the difference.
Okay. Any questions on the 21207? All right, resolution number 21208, accept CLG tax credit brochure grant.
This is to do a brochure for those tax credits that, gives me an opportunity to say Caroline has done an outstanding job assisting the residents and businesses in the neighborhood to get these tax credits. It's actually she just does that as part of what she does daily, but this brochure will allow us to give these to, if we're working with economic development, somebody's needing, to give them the brochures to let them know that that's just something else that we offer.
There be a digital edition too, or just print?
Yeah, it's one, there's two separate brochures. One is for tax credits for commercial. Because when I meet with commercial developers and I say, oh, did you look at the email I sent you? It was, I don't have time to read. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna start handing them something physically. And then the other is for property owners within the district so that they're aware, just sort of a good reminder of you're within the district. And whether it's door hanger brochure, direct mail, we haven't quite figured out. We'll work with the marketing team to figure out what they think will be best.
Thank you.
As we get this is because we are a CLG, and, I know that you will get occasionally, people who will complain that they're not, that when they go to get their COAs, that we're, but that is why that we are so strict on what we allow people individuals in the neighborhood to do, is so we can maintain that CLG status, so we can get these tax credits to do these in the future. Is that? Partly, yeah. I mean, other than just the fact that it's, they are in the historic district and there's regulations, but.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you, sir. All right, resolution number 21209, declare surplus of municipal equipment no longer needed by the garage. Becky.
Yes, thank you. Yes, this is a good bit of equipment that is pretty much old and outdated. The majority of it fit on old garbage trucks that's basically been already scrapped out, and they're just cleaning up. We just needed to surplus them out.
Okay, any questions? All right, next is resolution 21210, declare surplus of municipal vehicles, equipment no longer needed by a landfill.
Yes, this is a 2014 Bomag trash compactor and 2014 New Holland farm tractor. The Bomag, they possibly may want to do a trade-in, and the New Holland would be good for GovDeals or J.M. Woods Auction Company.
Okay, any questions? Thanks, Becky.
Thank you.
All right, resolution number 21211, award bid number 21021 for electrical repair services to Perry Company.
Yeah, Council President Ladner, Mayor and Council. This is one of our standing bids that is approaching expiration and requires a rebid under state law. It's just electrical repair, and it's small installations.
Okay, any questions? All right, resolution number 21212, award bid number 21024 for litter services to L&L Outdoor Services.
Yes, sir. This is for pickup and disposal of litter along parts of 6th Avenue and parts of the Beltline. Received one bid, L&L Outdoor. State law allows us to negotiate with them. We also included a clause in the bid that we can change the number of weeks. It's not necessarily 452 weeks a year to see how it goes. But we're also going to, Park and Rec is going to negotiate the actual weekly rate. It's allowed to us under the state law.
Do we need to do anything, Herman, if we want to negotiate that?
As long as the contract reflects what we negotiate.
Okay. Yeah, we would want to do that, obviously. All right, any questions from Charles? Carl. All right, resolution number 21213, approve engineering department, street department truck purchase. Carl.
Yes, Mayor, Council, this is a purchase of a dump truck for the street department that's going to come out of the alley fund. This is a short dump truck that typically runs in the alleys, help maintain the alleys and whatnot.
Okay. Any questions? I have a history with alleys. All right, thanks, Carl. Resolution number 21214, declare Franklin Rock and Recycle a sole source for rental of a grinder for the landfill.
Yes, sir. This was a late addition. Thank Stephanie and Herman. Everybody got it on in time. It's somewhat of an emergency. The state law doesn't allow for emergencies. So the law was changed back in 2016 where the council is the only one that declares the sole source. I'm going to let Wanda explain to you why this is and the state law actually says of an indispensable nature, and it's not readily available from only one vendor. So It's kind of complicated. So.
Wanda Tyler, landfill and recycling. We are in desperate need of a grinder. The Peterson, the 2012 Peterson that we have now, the tank is gone. It's gonna take us 8 to 10 weeks to get a new tank. We ordered it last week. I have a mountain of debris because of the storms we've had and the constant debris that's coming in. And also, with the rains last week, not having that mulch or that reduced debris, I mean, it almost crippled us. Wait times had increased, and right now, we need a solution. I've contacted Thompson Heavy Machines, also Metso out of North Carolina, and this is the only vendor I can find where I can lease something for a couple of months in order to get us back on track.
So this is a rental while the other one's being repaired?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Will the repair get you back where you need to be?
The repair will get us working. I will need to rebuild it.
Yeah.
There's a conveyor belt, the hammers, there are other issues with, it's an old machine. I mean, we're gonna come before you and talk about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's an old machine that needs to be replaced.
It's a pretty expensive machine.
It is, it's about 1.2 is my last, quote
But it
that I
has a
received.
good return.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And the estimate, I'm meeting with Thompson in the morning, but the estimate I'm getting for a trade-in is about $200,000 for this one.
All right, any questions for Wanda or Charles?
This is good, thank you.
All right, next we have ordinances, first readings, ordinance number 214471, establishing recycling processing fees at the landfill recycling facility. Do you want to handle that, or either one?
Well, basically, yes, I'd like for her to have it.
So I don't know if you all got the presentation I put together. So this is the ordinance so we can start implementing a processing fee for our partners that have used our facilities for free for years. And it's $26 a ton. And I think it's effective October 1?
The first 499 pounds.
Yes.
Doesn't cost anything.
And then after
If
that,
that's all you have, if you have more than that, it's gonna cost you $26 a
a
ton.
ton.
And it also has a provision, and if for whatever reason we cannot operate, we have the discretion of the director to reject the recycling at that time, to the extent it's necessary. That was something she thought was helpful, and I did too, so we put it in there.
Who were we doing this for before? I know Hartsel.
It was Hartsel, Athens, Lawrence County, why am I not thinking?
Not Coleman?
Coleman, yes, Coleman, Industry Partners in the Rama, for, yeah,
And we didn't charge anybody anything?
there's nothing.
Are they, I know Hartsel is, but are the others aware that we'll?
Athens is, yeah.
Okay. Okay. All right, any other questions for Wanda? That's good, charging. Instead of spending money, we're charging for something.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next we have all these ordinances, changes for Chip.
Yes, sir, I'm gonna spare you the discomfort. I've presented these 8 ordinance changes twice. If you got any questions, I'll be happy to answer them, but they're identical to what we talked about last time.
I do have one question, just, and some of it was, I think David gave us some response the last 2 weeks. One is around the year model of the ambulance.
6 versus 7.
Well, just that, if we're gonna have a 250,000 mile cap, requirement, does the year model matter? And I was just curious of all of you, obviously the mileage would seem to be more important than the actual model, but do y'all have any issue with?
It seems like he's on, that any ambulance service will meet the mileage requirement. We exceed that within the years.
Right.
If you look at how many miles they put on the truck a year, like the box that it does, it's gonna be 7, 8 years old, they start having to roll it out.
So I guess then my question is, why have it in there? if you're saying no matter, it doesn't matter anyway, does it really matter if we removed it? Does it make the ordinance, the problem we've always had with is everybody's, and I don't know if it's true or not, but everybody says ordinance is too strict, that's why we don't have competition, et cetera. Is removing that helpful to make the ordinance more attractive to other potential providers? I don't know, I'm just asking the question.
I think the big deal is the mileage on the truck, the wear and tear on the truck. I mean, you can have, you're lucky to find a 2000 model that's got 150,000 miles in it, it may be just as good a shape. I think it's the 250,000 miles, which is the wear and tear on the vehicle that's really, really important.
Well, so I personally would be okay with removing the
It's an
years.
easy fix.
Yeah, I
Just
think
take
that's
that out.
fine.
I know that's a request you guys have had. Are there any other, go ahead.
On that, I mean, how many ambulances, are you seeing those used ones out there with that low of mileage? I mean, you said you average about 70,000 a year, so you'd have to find one that's well below that within, what is that, 3.5 years or so?
We can acquire units with considerable less than 250,000.
That are older than 6 years?
You're probably looking at, some, you have to be selective, but some.
All right,
Yeah, I think the shape and the mileage, for me is more important than the year, so.
That's fine.
okay, were there any other, questions around any of these changes to the ordinance? We were gonna remove the requirement for an audited financial statement. Is that correct?
I didn't hear that, but if that's what you
So
want.
I think there should, this is just my opinion, so get everybody. But I don't think we should, I'm okay with not requiring an audited statement. I do think there should be a reviewed statement. And then if we, and/or some kind of a certificate of whatever, if, I know a lot of this had to do with the governmental.
And we did that on the governmental one.
That they could also guarantee it from their parent company. There was a corporate guarantee clause, which is good too, but I think we need to consider a reviewed statement as opposed to.
Are you talking about just for during the application process or on the yearly reports?
I think annual.
Okay.
Let me, I don't wanna, but if you amend the ordinance as presently presented, it's a material change, and that would be, then you have to reintroduce it. You could not, unless you double vote it. So you can double vote it with that change.
I did, I think, make that comment a couple of weeks ago, so I don't know.
Well, I understand, but I'm just sharing, if it hadn't been changed, no, but you can still double vote it.
Yeah, okay.
And there are separate ordinances, so it's.
I don't think we should require an audited statement, but I'm one guy out of 5. So
That'd be
I'm not saying don't change it, I'm just saying.
I think you're, no, I'm just kidding. Let's consider making that change too.
Okay.
If you're okay with that. And we can debate it next week. Well, I guess should we wait and leave them as they are and then have that conversation next week about amending it?
Let's put it in y'all's pleasure. It can't be changed until, I'm talking about, it cannot be introduced except a full council meeting.
Yeah.
So if you change it, it would have to be done next Monday. I'm not trying to cloud it, I'm just trying to educate.
Yep. Okay. Any other questions on these?
I think that's all I had. Double check.
All right. Did you want to comment on any of those ordinance?
Mayor, councils. The only other thing that we'd like to comment on is the penalties, penalties for points and monetary penalties. We just feel like it should be one or the other. We're okay with one or the other. but both just seems to be a little excessive. You're gonna get penalized monetarily, $5,000 or whatever the case may be, and then you're gonna get points added to the same infraction, so it's kind of a double jeopardy type situation. We just feel like we should, be more simple to go one way or the other, either monetary or to the penalty side, for the points, that is. Thank you.
Okay. All right, any other comments on that? All right, we will, any other comments from any directors? Any other comments from the mayor?
From other mayors?
Yeah, other
No,
mayors?
no.
Anything else from council? What we'll do is, if we can take 5 minutes, and, because Mr. Jackson, is he on his way, you think? We'll take 5 minutes and see if Mr. Jackson's, he wanted to have the kind of work session discussion around the transport, so we'll, see if he's on his way, and we'll start back at 5:35, if that's okay with you. Ready to get started. Y'all might as well sit close. I mean,
Yeah, if anybody's talking, make sure you got a microphone, so.
hey, so let's, if we don't mind, kind of get started. David, can you, I know you got up a few weeks ago and talked about the transports and some of your concerns about that and if it should be ended. And you talked about there were some infractions that you felt like had occurred with some of the transports and things. Do you mind kind of giving us a recap so we can start the conversation?
Mr. Childers, before you start speaking, I'm gonna step down from the podium and recuse myself from this work session. I'll make way for you. Excuse me, Mr.
Mayor, council, I would just go to our request, and I'm sure quite possibly Decatur Fire will, or someone else will want to talk, and then we can kind of sweep all that up later, or I can rather. But on February the 1st, Resolution 2128, a temporary resolution was adopted for a special reason for the COVID crisis about inter-facility hospital transports by a local facility to any other facility in which they own. Since then, the national emergency has been rescinded. The state emergency has been rescinded. As far as I'm aware, the local emergency was rescinded when the state was. And we would ask that this ordinance, or excuse me, this resolution, temporary resolution 2128, be rescinded as well at this time.
Okay. And you did mention when you brought this up last time that there were, I think what kind of triggered the thought of we need to have a work session to talk about this was you mentioned there were infractions committed by Decatur Morgan on some of these transports.
Council President, I know for the sake of time, I want to keep it short. I'm just going to name one. If we want to go down the road of more, we can, but I'm going to name one right now. In the temporary resolution, it states inter-facility transfers from this facility's owned to any facility owned by that system. Okay, and then it outlines what exactly it is, inter-facility transfer, and it goes into saying, this resolution authorizes only intra-facility transports, and neither this facility nor any affiliated facility by that provider may be dispatched by Morgan County 911 for any emergency or non-emergency call, and may not respond to any emergency or non-emergency call except as required in the event of a mutual aid or mass casualty event. So your resolution outlines that basically they can go from one of their own facilities to another of their own facilities for inter-facility transfer. Nothing outside of that body, if you will, or system, picking up or dropping off outside of that system. One example, 628, a transport originated inside the city of Decatur at a facility and was taken to East Alabama Behavioral Psychiatric Transfer. That is not within that system. And that was taken by the company or ambulance provider that was granted this temporary resolution. It's in direct violation of this temporary resolution. That's one example. I'll open the for questions for anybody or allow someone else to speak. If we need to go deeper, we can.
So I guess my only question is, do you say there's multiple things that are similar to that you're saying?
Yes, sir.
And you did report the last one to the state?
We have, well, we will briefly go through this. Your resolution said no emergency transports. 7/3/21, there was an emergency transport that was transported. Once we were actually dispatched, and then once we arrived on scene, we were told that that facility's ambulance would take that call from us. Just today, 7/26.
So I show a text from Decatur Fire Leadership that on Saturday, June the 26th, we ended up with 13 what's termed as zeroing out by first response, which put the city in a position to where we had to have coverage for our municipality. And with that, we reached out to Decatur Morgan Hospital after utilizing all the services that Lifeguard, who is our standby, as I understand it, and they had exhausted their ability to support us based on the calls.
And Mayor, and that was on what date? I'm sorry.
Chief Thornton has the information for that, but it would be on June the 26th, excuse me. And it's important to note that it's not just for that date, but it's for multiple dates.
Right.
So we had no choice but to seek assistance for our citizens.
On that particular day, June 26th to be clear, and I know this can be convoluted at best because we're in it every day, and this is something totally new to you guys. Councilman Jackson's been living this for a number of years. There's a difference between zeroing out, rolling a call, and not being able to take a call. Okay, zeroing out means you're held at the hospital and your trucks are there, waiting for a bed for ever how long that might be, and your last truck is not available, or it gets dropped on another call and it's running another emergency. Particular day you're talking about, verifiable records from the Morgan County 911 Center. I have here, we have the director here as well, can verify this. On June 26th, there was 4 times, not 13, 4, that the city, that first response was zeroed, okay? On that day, there was 1 transport rolled, i.e. picked up by another service, which was Lifeguard, Medic 501, and that was picked up at 16:59 hours. So that's not the days that I'm referring to with this issue that we're speaking about tonight. And again, I'd like to reiterate that zeroed out is different than rolled, and rolled is different than not being able to take the call. And if we look at zeroed out only, again, 4 calls, not 13, or 4 times, not 13. That's what I was reported to from the 911 center. We have the documents from February all the way through the end of June for those.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I think we need to just understand if there were calls or transports or whatever that are outside of the ordinance the resolution that was passed in February.
I think we're talking about I feel like we're starting to get off track a little bit, talk about 2 different problems. Let's talk about the transports first, and then we'll get into zero calls unless we think those need to be discussed together.
Well, I think they probably have something to do with each other, but yeah, if you want to respond to that. I'm just curious about if there were transports that happen outside of what we had passed in February, why that would be the case.
You're right, I think they're in there.
Yeah.
I just want to touch base on a couple of things. I don't know which one to start with. When he first got up here, he talked about the COVID calls, about how many we got. I can talk about that, about the numbers and what they're doing. A while ago, he said that he's only going to discuss one call where there was a violation. Well, he's told us in ARB and different meetings that there are multiple times there's been violations. I think it's only been one complaint turned into our office, so what the other violations and complaints are, we have no idea up to this date. We still don't know what they are. So I don't know if they're a valid or founded complaint or not. I think that's kind of a smoke and mirrors on the road calls and the zero calls. When dispatch gets a call and they need an ambulance to go to it and we don't have an ambulance, it can be whatever you want to call it, we don't have an ambulance to go to it. On the day that you mentioned, when we had our conversations and talked, there were 13 different calls, and I got all those calls listed, and I can give you a copy of what calls they are. One of the calls that we went on, they waited over an hour for an ambulance to arrive on scene. For a 911 emergency call, shortness of breath, they waited over an hour for an ambulance to come on scene. Lifeguard did not have any ambulances to send. We tried with Athens, tried with Hemsey, Greg's. That's where we was at with that, during that situation. We just didn't have an ambulance to come to it. Also, a while ago when he was talking about the ordinance and what it says, if you look in the ordinance that we go by for the CPNC, on 311, it talks about rendering assistance during any federal, state, or local declared disaster, catastrophe, or major emergency when the ambulance is authorized to operate in the city by the CPNC. So first response is who that's talking about. They're the only ones that's got a CPNC. So the ambulances that's authorized to work here are either insufficient in number or inadequate for other reason as determined by the DFR chief or EMS coordinator. So that's why we looked to try to do something else, and we did it within what the ordinance says. We didn't have ambulances, and we had people waiting on wrecks. We had people that finally just said, we're not gonna go and wait any longer, and would get in their car and go to the hospital on their own. So I think I've touched on about everything you said. Zeroed out. Now, he may be right as far as rolling calls to somebody else. They tried to roll all those calls when they didn't have an ambulance that was there to come to the scene. But I think maybe he may be correct with that maybe only 4 were rolled, but the other ones had delayed wait times on the scene because they couldn't get anybody else to go to the call.
Now, the reason is, elaborate on that just a little bit. Some of the other, certainly hate to, not fun stuff to share, but some of the other ambulance services beyond lifeguard, we're tired of, had grown weary of responding and propping up someone that had a CPNC right here.
And we was told part of it was they were tired of coming into the city to run the calls that he is supposed to be running. And then so many times that when they would come into the city right before they would get there, an ambulance would clear up, and after they made a trip from somewhere else in Morgan County or a different county, when they, right before they got there, they would have an ambulance that cleared up, and then they would have to go back home. It was a wasted call for them, wasted money.
Mary, you said other services beyond lifeguard. Is there a reason we're excluding lifeguard?
No, sir, I just wanted to make a point that there were outlying services that were trying to help the municipality.
So is lifeguard of the same position as these others?
Can't say on that. I know that they were maxed out at times to where they couldn't come in.
And there, like you said, it was times that all of them were maxed out. And I know it's just not a problem with first response. They're all having problems with employees and staffing, but that don't help our problem here in the city when we have people waiting as long as we do to do something about it.
Can y'all speak specifically to the 628 call that David described of a transport to East Alabama?
Okay, if I'm not mistaken, Chief England may need to get up here and talk on that because he handles all the complaints, but I'm pretty sure, is that not the one that had waited for 24 hours to be transferred? And first response, when they was called about it, said they had no idea when they could get to it. So that transfer out of the hospital had already been waiting over 24 hours. And the CP&C, by the time guidelines, allows us to roll the call to somebody else. But I'll let you get up and talk about that if you want to, because he knows the time.
If I could just chime in right behind him really quick.
Can we get that question answered first?
Well, I just want, we might not have to answer that question when I give you this answer.
Well, let's let Ashley talk about the 628 call. Because the reason, David, is because I think the only reason we're having this discussion is because you said there are a bunch of infractions that have happened, and you named one, so I'm just trying to understand the one.
We'll take them one by one.
Okay, so, and I'm really only concerned about the ones that you've actually filed complaints on.
So to answer the 628, I'm not real familiar with that. Like you said, it has not been presented to me in my office. The only infraction that Mr. Childers has presented to us in my office is about the illegal transport of the critical care truck from Huntsville. I do know that I do get a lot of calls, various times during the day and night about people needing to go to the hospital or from the hospital to another service. And some of these are time critical. Some of these need to go now. And a lot of them, if they've been waiting 7, 8, 10 hours, like Chief Thornton said, if it wastes a certain amount of time, then we can authorize it to roll it. And some of those, if I would be happy to look at each one he has an issue with and look at it and go back and do research on it, but until he presents it to me, then I have nothing to go on.
And so what about the one that has been presented to you?
The critical care truck, is that the one so what it is Huntsville Hospital provides a specialty care critical care truck. And what that is, you have a critical care nurse and a respiratory therapist. They go not only to Decatur, but they go to Athens, all over the United States, and pick up patients and bring them back to Huntsville Hospital. That's covered under the ordinance as far as critical care goes. It's also, that is an extension of the hospital. I recently talked to Mr. Stringer from Alabama Department of EMS and Dr. Crawford, and both of them have said that's an extension of the hospital. So that's not governed by the EMS, state EMS.
Any questions?
As far as any other calls like that, I would have to have prior knowledge of them to be able to research and look at them and things like that.
Okay. All right, I'm good. David?
Can I speak to
Yeah.
just like two things? Number one, making reference to the resolution, I think it's important to note that the resolution did not link to states of emergency or state-issued, city-issued, anything else, other emergency situations called by a government entity. It says until such time as the COVID crisis is fully resolved. All you have to do is open the paper or turn on the news or listen to the mayor's press conference this morning to realize that the COVID situation is not fully resolved. So we're still within that window. It is possible that the council could still say the situation or the crisis is over, and therefore there can be no more transport. My position to that would be, the city's position would be that given what Tracy and Ashley have just talked about the number of times that there are no ambulances available, and the number of times that Decatur Morgan at our request has stepped in to take emergency calls, that's that many more emergency calls that would not be getting transported but for Decatur Morgan acting. The last sentence of this resolution and the ordinance itself allows when the provider can't or won't provide that they can roll to anybody that they can. And that includes Decatur Morgan. And rather than being a violation, they are helping out making emergency calls when they couldn't be made otherwise. And then the last thing is about the transports and other things. It says that they may not be dispatched by 911, and I would say that when first response is dispatched, they can't take the call and actually begins the process, which he does frequently, trying to track down somebody else to make the call. It's quit being a 911 dispatch situation then, and we're back in the original ordinance. He's trying to find somebody to make an emergency call when there's nobody else available. So that takes it out of this resolution as well.
Council President, on this 628 call, this one that we're talking about now, we're going to further. Anytime you transport a patient that is insurance pay outside of 100 miles from the origination point, you have to fill out a prior authorization form and request for the insurance company to review, no matter which one it is, besides Blue Cross Blue Shield, they have to review, and they have to say they're going to pay or they're not going to pay. That's out of our hands, okay? We filled the form out for the prior authorization. This call was called in, we filled it out. We've done what we should do. And we're waiting on that to see if it would be a paid call or not. It's not first response's problem that Medicaid is a little slow. Okay? It's not the patient's problem either. It's not the hospital's problem either. But to stand up here and try to say that this call held because we held the call, no, sir. We didn't hold the call. People need to dig into the insurance billing and find the rules and regulations before they speak. This was not held up because of us. This was held up because we were waiting on a prior authorization, which we're mandated to fill out and get before we do transport. We could still do the transport without that, but when it's denied, we have no appeal rights. So that's one.
Just to be clear.
Y'all gotta
Come on,
to the
they
mic.
can come to it.
He's talking about on the 28th, the transport of East Alabama Behavioral Center.
Did you have reported that call to the state?
No,
As an infraction?
No, that's not a state infraction.
Okay, did you report it to these guys as an infraction?
We have not reported it to them.
I really don't wanna hear anything tonight about
But
if
that's-
you haven't reported, you're saying there's an infraction that, I think you
understand.
should report those if you feel like there's
But
been some kind of.
You done a temporary ordinance. I'm telling you what's happened to that, okay? If I make a report, here's a report. This was reported on, to Mr. England by Mr. Tyndall, that on 7/25, medic 325 was in the emergency room holding the wall, and at approximately 10:51, a transfer was rolled to the hospital service. Is that right for us to be holding the wall and then another call that's right beside us, get pushed out to another service? Is that right? This was reported. I bet it's gonna be unfounded by the time we're done with it. But Mr. Ladner, all due respect, I've gathered a lot of documentation here, but reporting this is like reporting it to the Fox Garden and Hen House, okay? I've got documentation after documentation of what's happened. We can get down to fractal response times if you want to with the other provider. The other thing that they're talking about of calls that were taken, were they Bravo calls? Those are emergencies. Were they Delta calls? Those are emergencies. Were they Echo calls? Those are emergencies. Alpha calls are not emergencies. Charlie calls are not emergencies. So when we look at the calls that they've actually been dispatched to, okay, and emergency transfers as well, okay? We look at that and we find out during this whole time that we're talking about not having units available. And let's just start at the start. February, there was 2 emergency calls. Emergency, Bravo, Delta, or Echoes. Okay, for March. And remember, we passed this resolution because, or you guys passed this resolution because first response was having such a problem. It's a artificially injected problem, might I add. So February, we met our response times. Okay, the first quarter of this year, our response times in the city was 93.16, and for the police jurisdiction, 91.43. But we still passed a temporary resolution because there was quote-unquote a problem. It was an artificially created problem. So let's go back to what we have that is hard documents. February, there was 2 non-emergency calls, Charlie calls, that was rolled to another service, not by us. Charlie calls are non-emergency calls. March, there was 2 emergency calls. One was a Bravo, a lower acuity call. One was a Delta, a higher acuity call. 2. April, there was 2 transfers that was given out. They were a Delta call and a Delta call. Okay, 2. Also in April, there were 4 non-emergency calls that was rolled per the EMS coordinator. May, there was 5 Bravo, Deltas, and Echoes that was rolled. 5. That's when we started losing employees. There was 4 non-emergencies, okay, in the last month. June, again, 4 emergencies, a Delta and a Bravo, and a Delta that were rolled. The rest of the other 4 calls that was rolled were non-emergency calls. Time was not of the essence. The citizens of Decatur have not been put in danger because of any of this. They're non-emergency calls.
Well, one thing I just want to clear up, you said that we passed, or the resolution was passed because of artificial whatever. We actually, you were the one that told us you were being held up at the hospital all the time. And so the resolution was to let the transport to the hospital go to someone else, that you wouldn't constantly be held up there. So if anyone artificially injected a reason to do it, it was actually you. I just, that was the main reason we did that, is because of the amount of people at the hospital, and you said you were constantly held up there.
Sure, we were constantly held up there. And then when we look at it in this fashion, of this report that Mr. Tyndall had made on the 25th, why not just hold first response trucks up against the wall and roll the rest of the calls to yourself? It can be a game. If you want it to be a game, it can be a game. I think Chip alluded to the newspaper. I had 22 years of experience of skirting the rules. If you want to play, if they want to make it a game, I don't play with games with people's lives and transports.
Yeah.
And the temporary resolution that was made, it's been violated. We have proof it's been violated, and we asked for it to be rescinded. Smoke and mirrors game, we're not the one playing smoke and mirrors. We have hard data. Thank you. And one quick thing, really quick here. I know that the city of Decatur, all due respect, can't supersede the rules and regulations of the state of Alabama. Page 39 of the mutual aid in 420-2-1.22 states that for mutual aid, you're to have a written agreement. We don't have a written agreement. And in closing, it's obviously up to the council to rescind this or not to rescind it. We're just here stating that we have proven data that the temporary resolution was operated outside the bounds of the temporary resolution. And also, I would like to add at this time, if there's any documentation of transfers, transports, or anything that the EMS coordinator has, I would just ask, is the EMS coordinator keeping up with the non-emergency transfers that is coming from the hospital? Because we have to go through 911 because the city wants to know how many non-emergency transfers are out there annually. So is anyone keeping up with the non-emergency transfers that's coming from the hospital? Thank you.
I'll say that.
Yes, sir.
It might be, bad business, poor accounting, or just irresponsible on your part that you have not reported, so-called infractions, and I don't know if they're infractions or not, to the ARB or to the state, if you have them, cited there. But from my perspective, and I can't speak for anybody else here, from my perspective, whether you've reported those things or not, the only way to get to the bottom of this is to actually have knowledge of all of those situations that you have. I mean, they could be factual, they could not be factual.
Yes, sir.
They could be completely fictitious.
Yes, sir.
They could be real. But the only way for me to be able to make a good and conscious decision about what I want to, how I want to vote, is by knowing all the data, whether you report it or not, and I don't know why you would report it, but whether you report it or not, I want to have all the information.
Yes, sir. And council members, these infractions that I'm talking about, with our new computer-aided dispatch system, they create a number called a CFS number. And these infractions actually have a CFS number that can be backtracked to where it originated and where it terminated. And Councilman Jackson, that would be what I could email every one of you guys and you could talk to. The 911 center, to verify these CFS numbers, that they are actual calls, where they were actually picked up at and where they were actually dropped off at. And I think that would prove our position at that point.
That would help, but again, just the things that you're citing, the infractions that Kay Morgan has done, is that where I get that as well?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you.
Before Tracy gets up, if I could just talking about the data, the reason that it's important for the ARB and for the fire department to have that information is so it can be checked out. When the only time the infractions are mentioned are in here in a meeting, there may be proof that, like the critical care call, that it was a valid call, but we're not gonna have that in our hands when we're in here when the allegation is made. That's why they have to report it. And whether all the data is important to have or not, Ashley, as EMS coordinator, was attempting to try, when we realized that we were having all these rolled calls, or zeroed out calls, Ashley proactively sought to find out why that was and requested information from first response about the number of units they had working on particular days so that he could determine whether it was an overabundance of calls or not enough ambulances or what was causing the problems. And the response to him and to Chief Thornton when he followed up was talk to our lawyer if you want that information. Well, that's not getting the data we need to try to figure out how to fix the problems.
Well, let me say this, Chip. I agree with you 100% that every infraction, from their perspective, if it was an infraction, should have been reported.
Right.
It
So
should have
that we
been.
can just look at it.
We're not arguing that. I would never argue that with you, and I think that's very critical. That's a very critical point and an accurate point. But I do think that if we're going to get to the bottom of this situation and put it in a perspective where it's going to help the citizens of our city in the most constructive and positive way, we need to know if those infractions, we need to know what those supposed infractions are. Because again, just like I just said, they might be real, they might not be. But we need to know exactly what they are. We need to know what those accusations are so that we can follow that trail. And if they're real, then maybe Mr. Childers has a point. If they're not, then maybe we need to, move in a different direction. But again, I don't know that I'm capable of coming to a good and clear and responsible decision without having all of that, whether it's been reported or not. And again,
Sure.
that's all I'm saying.
And I agree with that, that you need to be able to have the information in order to make a good decision, which is also what the ARB and the EMS coordinator are lacking. And
And they shouldn't be.
we're not gonna have the accurate information if the paperwork comes in and is laid on the dais for y'all, and we've never looked at it because we don't have a chance to investigate it.
Okay.
And so that, and I'm glad you brought up the point, the responsible thing. Since we have not, in my opinion, since we have not come out of the resolution because the COVID crisis is not fully resolved, I think it would be irresponsible for the council to end that, because every call that is based on a zeroed out ambulance service, that Decatur Morgan has had to carry the person that people have had to go in their cars to the hospital because first response doesn't show up. That's just gonna exasperate itself if we take the only entity that's trying to pitch in and help out of the mix. The problem's gonna get worse rather than better.
I think that's one perspective, but I don't know that I see it quite that way.
I'm just sitting listening, and it's very intriguing. Why can he not report, children report all these to the ARB, get them evaluated, and then we get a true picture? Why don't we do that and bring it to the council?
I don't, and that's what I don't understand too, Herman. I mean,
I'm sitting here.
I don't know why, and I can't answer for Mr. Childers why he's not reported these things. I can't. But again, I think that in order for me as a council member, as a voting person, I need that information before I can say, this is, I know, you're right. We should, I'm in agreement with that.
Get both perspectives and bring it to the council, so you get the full picture.
Yeah.
And y'all make a decision.
My perspective's a little different. I really don't wanna see it if it's not been reported, because I mean, you could come up with 1,000 different scenarios to say there's some infraction, but to me, if it's not a bad enough infraction to report, I don't really wanna hear it. So, we can look at all the complaints that Mr. Childers has that he says are infractions, but if you guys aren't even seeing them to be able to respond and tell us if they are or not, I don't know. I mean, it just doesn't really do me much good. But go ahead, Ashley.
So I'm just going to cover just a few short things real quick. One, about the infractions. And Jeannie, correct me if I'm wrong, but we can only go back 30 days from today. Isn't that correct?
Well, I can find data for however far back that you want to.
Okay.
Our contract with first response is that we cannot evaluate or guarantee AVL data.
Okay, AVL data, that's my fault.
Back in that to show location.
All right, so another thing is Mr. Childers alluded to that Charlie calls are not emergencies. Charlie calls require a non-emergency response. That's not saying that they're not emergency calls. Some of the Charlie calls we get are chest pains, diabetic emergency, unconscious, things of that nature, strokes, things of that nature. When we first implemented the new Pro QA system, Decatur Fire Rescue was not responding to these Charlie calls. After some time in research, we learned that some of these calls were stroke, heart attacks, things like that, and first response, which by 911's definition, how they're responding, were responding not emergency. So we started responding to those calls. To say they're not emergency that's how they respond. They're still held to a standard when 911 gets a call and they get dispatched, they be en route within a timely manner. So to say, those calls are not emergency calls, it shouldn't be counted is wrong. Another thing is Mr. Tyndall did email me today a complaint form for Medic 325 like Mr. Childers has spoke of, and I emailed him back at 1:46 requesting the information of what time that unit was at the hospital, how many units were working during that time, which was yesterday, and then also what units were on calls during the time at 325 was at the ER. I emailed you back today at 1:46. You got that email correct?
Yes.
Okay. Another thing that Mr. Childers alluded to is that the hospital does not provide us with the non-emergency transfers or transports or emergency transfers. They don't have to. They don't have a CPNC right now, so they don't fall under it. But Ms. Carrie Wynn has given me a copy since February until July 12th of all the calls they've ran, whether it be transfers or when they ran 911 calls. The reason they started running 911 calls is because, I can't remember what day it was, but first response did not have ambulance, lifeguard did not have ambulance, and there was a lady in southeast side of town that needed an ambulance. And Ladder Through was on scene requesting a truck. And I'm not gonna sit in my office and listen for somebody needing an ambulance when there's one sitting at Parkway. I'm not gonna do it. There's a perfectly good ambulance sitting there. They could run the call. I called Carrie, she said they could run it. And I think they got it right to the call, then was canceled. But I'm the reason they ran calls that day. So if anybody has an issue with that, then it needs to come to me, because I'm not gonna sit in my office and listen for somebody needing an ambulance when I know there's one across town.
What level call was that?
I don't remember what level call it was.
I'm trying to figure, why can't fire department, ARV function, and ambulance services, hospital, whomever, we're just going in a circle. Let's get every day.
Well, I think, to me,
Welcome to my world.
How can y'all make a decision when you don't have the information?
because to me, there's the issue, and I know we're going round and round. I agree with what David said at the very beginning, that we passed that ordinance because of COVID. We very clearly said that. It says it in there. And there were probably 100 patients or more at the time in the hospital. And now I think there were 5 through the weekend, maybe 8 or so today. So I do think there's a legitimate, should we continue these transports or not, based on what we passed that ordinance on. And there's also an issue that they've all spoken to of, there are people waiting on ambulances, and we've got perfectly good ambulances sitting at the hospital. So to me, those are two separate things. That do we still kind of go with why we passed it the first time, or is there a reason that we need to be able to continue those transports?
Those things might really go hand in hand.
I think they probably do.
They might really go hand in hand, because those, I mean, I got a call, and it wasn't from first response, and I'll just say it wasn't from lifeguard, but they said that the hospital was, and they used the word poaching, the employees of first response and of other services. And the reason that I was given that first response, and this person came out and said, look, I hate first response. Can't stand first response. The reason they can't answer calls is because the hospital is taking their employees, and that's creating a difficult situation for them. And then what they said was that it's the state of emergency that we have now is being created by that original state of emergency that we put in place when we allowed the hospital to do transports. And to me, that kind of makes sense where, you know, and again, I've always said, and David, you have to understand this, I've always told David, I really don't appreciate his business. I've shared that with David. And I've been absolutely as honest with him as I possibly can. But the fact is that I think that everybody needs to be on a level playing field, and everything needs to be done right. And if that service is being hampered because of the fact that we put the hospital in the game, then that's not really a fair playing field. And that's kind of the way I look at it. So I think that the two might go hand in hand, where the first responses ambulances are sitting there and you know, they're not making calls, and where the hospital's ambulances are sitting there and first response is not making calls. So you call on them, but one's problem created the other one. So and again, I'm sure that all of you guys have gotten phone calls from different people, but I surely have. So that's kind of what
And I don't think the hospital is poaching employees. I don't think they're going to first response employees saying, hey, come work for us. I just think that that's the employee's decision to go
to go
I'm
work.
just simply saying what I was
Yeah,
told.
yeah, I understand,
Simply
but
saying
I
what
don't,
was
I mean,
told.
I think
I'm
it's
not
just.
being in on that conversation with the hospital or with Mr. Childers, but I'm just saying what I was told by ambulance service.
And another is reporting, and Ashley and Tracy can both speak to this, the incidents where it's actually been reported that their ambulances have been held up too long at the hospital. We've called and checked. Their ambulances are not there. They've already left. And so if it's reported being held up, we can, but 3 weeks later, if we get a reconstruct it to why they were there, or
I have actually known from Jason. I was talking last, say that he has a truck held up at the hospital, and then I would call the hospital and they would say there's not a truck here. And then later on, we would find out, I was on the phone with Jason, and he would find out that they wasn't there.
I just, a couple of quick things. Candace Atkins from the North Alabama Healthcare Coalition, she's part of the COVID task force that Chief Allen heads up. She sends out weekly COVID. Ending on 7/19, there were 84 new cases of COVID. I heard you say some numbers a while ago. 84 new cases. 14 days later, there were an additional 118 new numbers. And then another 14 days was 136 new numbers. And after this weekend, she sent another update, which she don't normally do, but the number went to 249 in Morgan County alone. Madison, the number is 607 in Madison, UK at that point. That we, as Chip says, there is still some issues with COVID. And I want to touch base a while ago that David was talking about that we started letting them transport patients back in February, and he was meeting his times, and he'd sit up here and give your times on that. Well, if you look in the ordinance changes that we've asked to do for y'all to vote on next week, there is no penalty, no anything if he didn't have enough trucks and we had to roll that call to somebody else. So he could theoretically put 2 trucks in service and roll every call that come into him that those 2 trucks couldn't handle, and there was no penalty for doing that. So we were rolling a lot of calls, and they wasn't counting towards his fractal times. So if you look inside what these changes are, one of the changes in what we've asked to do is if you have a road call, it counts as though you missed your times. That's whether it's in the PJ or in the city limits, either one, missed time. Up in vote on this, if you vote, there is no recourse. 1 truck if you wanted to, and then roll everything. I had something else and I can't think of what it was. All right, I guess that's all I got.
Kelly, you.
Thank you. Mayor, Council, thank you for letting me come up here. I just have a couple of quick things. Again, I want to just let you know that we got into this to try and help during the time of COVID, because as I said when I came before, if we have patients on the wall in the ER, a lot of times it's because we can't get the patients out from upstairs. So we have to discharge patients and have them transported sometimes to other places, nursing homes, even to the home at times. And if we can't get them out, then we can't get patients admitted. So again, we got into doing this. And when we started doing it, I really thought that it might hurt them financially. But I'm here today to tell you that from February to June of last year, the hospital paid first response $320,462 for the transports that were done between February and June of 2020. From February to June of 2021, we've paid $471,710 for less transports. So we've paid first response $151,248.25 more. So with that, he's done less transports, so he should be able to probably pay his staff more and have less staff and have new trucks and things that he needs, because he's actually made more money off of it than the year before with less transports. Something else he said, that not checking insurance before he picks me up on a 911 call. That is against state EMTALA, federal law.
That was not a 911 call, that was a psychiatric call, that you guys took to Dothan, and that was a Medicaid call, which requires prior authorization, let's don't confuse people.
Well, that's what you said. I wanted to make sure you weren't doing that, because that is a federal law that you have to follow.
we don't
You
take
cannot
that.
check insurance before picking up a 911 patient. That patient stayed in our emergency, could not get the psychiatric patient, or to East Alabama. And so we did call Ashley and said, could we get, after 24 hours, we've got to get this patient out of the emergency room. And finally, Ashley allowed us to take that, because first response could not take that. They said they didn't know when they would get to it with that. Again, Ashley did call me, as he mentioned earlier. We had a local leader here in town, works with the school system, whose father waited 45 minutes for a 911 call after having a stroke. And it was the next day that Ashley called and said, can y'all help? You know, I can't really allow the citizens of Decatur to wait that long for a 911 call. And I said, well, what do we need to do to help? I agree with Ashley, even if we just save one life by being able to help having those ambulances and that crew sitting there. So since then, we have added crew for 24/7. I don't really feel like we've poached any from anybody. We have tried to hire and not take their employees, knowing that they 911 calls. Employees that come to us are PRN and work as needed, so they're still full-time with first response and on his payroll. And honestly, most of them don't want to leave him because they said David won't hire them back if they leave. And we don't, you know, go into the business, they won't have a job. So most of his employees don't want to leave first response. There is a huge shortage of not only EMTs, but paramedics. It's not just in Alabama, it's everywhere. There's not, with COVID, they didn't have classes, so they weren't graduating as many. We're hoping HIMSI's starting their own program, and so hopefully maybe we can, you know, over the next couple of years, get more EMTs and paramedics trained with that. The other thing I said, you know, he's turned us in, first response has turned us in several times to the state, but so far we have none that are substantiated. They were all found unsubstantiated claims when the state came to visit us to check all those out.
How do you know first response turned in?
Because they tell us.
The state tells you? Who's the person? Can you give me the name of the person at the state that tells you?
No, because I don't want you to turn them in. I don't want
They're
you to
the
say
state. Who do
anything.
you turn them into? They're the state. Give me a name. Back it up.
Like you back it up.
He doesn't get it.
Yeah. In between two, yeah.
Y'all can handle
That's
this
fine.
privately, this has
Can
nothing to do
you
with our meeting.
send us those that you turned into the state?
I can't. And the state will not tell you who turned anybody in.
But can
Because
you,
that's where I'm alluding to, is we've turned in the critical care transport, okay? Other than that, I haven't turned anything in on it.
Who would turn us, who
So
else would
just
turn us
one-
in?
But, and one quick question I have to the council is what day did this ambulance service start operating 24 hours a day?
anybody have an answer to that?
June 28th?
June 28th?
That's when the state came up here and visited us from a complaint from somebody that we weren't operating 24/7. And again, we were just trying to help out, but they said we had to be operating 24/7, so we did. So now we can take the 911 calls.
Page 25 of the state rule says you'll operate 24, if you're an ALS1 provider, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, within 60 days of getting your ambulance license. So now we've got a mission that they haven't been operating within even the state.
But it sounds like the state checked that.
Well, I'm
They
just-
did.
I'm just saying that.
Yeah.
State. They did. Mhm.
You got anything?
Any questions for me?
I don't have any.
Thank you.
I mean, like Herman said, we have Ashley, the fire department, the ARB, there's processes, policies in place for the complaints. If Mr. Childers doesn't file the complaints, I just, if he has them, yeah, I agree with Mr. Jackson, it'd be great to see that before we make a decision, but it's gotta be a legitimate complaint, it's gotta be something that's turned in and filed. Until then, there's nothing more to discuss.
Is it within the purview of the ARB, since this was a temporary resolution with the guidelines set out in it, is it within the purview of the ARB
I agree.
But the resolution says that they don't have to follow the CPMC rules, basically. So that's the reason I'm asking if it's within the purview of the ARB.
I think you should report any of that to the in the same manner. Hold on. Go ahead.
Council, Mr. President, Mayor. Jeannie Ferris, I'm Morgan County 911 Director. We dispatch the calls and stuff. I try to stay out of this as much as absolutely possible. We're the neutral party. We're the ones that are calling, trying to make sure that we're taking those 911 calls, and we're also the ones that are trying to find ambulances to send to some of those 911 calls. We hold the contract for the county ambulance service, so we have a direct interest in ambulance responses as far as the county goes with lifeguard and as well as first response, because we contract to dispatch for them. What I'd like to mention is that I feel the council should be better informed a little bit about the statistics and the numbers that we report. So whichever side is reporting these numbers, I feel it's only fair to explain to you guys what those numbers mean so that you have a better understanding of what you're hearing. Number one, we do not track when first response is zeroed out. We have no way of tracking it because they could be zeroed out, which means they have no ambulances available and never miss a call. I mean, so for our part of it, what difference? As long as they make their calls, then that's what we're looking for. So when he says that we report zeroed out, we don't. That's not something that we have really the ability to report. What we do report back is what we consider a rolled call, or how we address rolled calls. The numbers that he was giving you, which conflicted with what Decatur Fire was giving you, is that if we have to call another ambulance service to take a call, then that's considered a rolled call. Some of what he was reporting were ambulances that came into the city that were rolled that ended in a transport. Not every emergency call or 911 call that we have another agency respond to necessarily results in a transport for that other agency. Also, there are the situations that they talk about is that our goal is to get an ambulance started. I don't care where it's coming from, at least get somebody going. Whether it's from Lifeguard, Coleman, Athens, Greg's, whoever it is, we call them all. We just start calling until we get somebody to take the call. So yes, they may be coming into the city, and then first response either clears up from a call that they were on, or the hospital, whatever it may be, and so they go through and they take the call, which I'm not saying is irresponsible, because they are responsible for the city of Decatur, so they're picking up a call that was rolled to another ambulance agency. Lifeguard, just to mention on them, since we hold their stuff, has never declined coming into the city of Decatur. The only times that they have declined is when they just flat out didn't have any ambulances available, or when they may have been so far out that you're talking 30, 45-minute drive, because there are areas in the county that are not exactly close to the city of Decatur. So they have been good with that. It doesn't really matter what level of acuity the call is that comes in. We have any from an Alpha, which is a very low priority call. Bravos basically are an emergency response from what's a basic life support truck, a non-paramedic truck, but it's still an emergency response for the truck. Charlie calls, as they explained, the trucks run non-emergency, but it's an advanced life support truck. It's not the same level of care. It's a higher level of care, just not a call that they necessarily need to run lights and sirens to. Your Delta and your Echo calls, those are, everybody should be lights and sirens, high priority, cardiac arrests, breathing problems, and those types of things. Any of these calls that come in, we are going to try to get an ambulance started. And that's our procedures and that's our policies. So when they talk about like the non-emergency calls, we do roll those, because in our eyes, that citizen needs somebody started regardless, because something can change. Just because our protocol and our questioning says that it's this level doesn't mean that it's 100%. It's about 95 to 98% statistically internationally with this system, but it's that 2 to 5% that you're banking on not getting help to, and we don't like that 2 to 5%, so we're going to start somebody. So if you guys want to look at those numbers, I can pull whatever you guys want as far as information goes. But please allow us also an opportunity to explain those to you so that you understand what you're reading.
Any questions for Jimmy? All right, anything else? That's it. All right.